the dean, but he's also a professor of law. And it's my understanding that he has taught at Temple, at Case Western Reserve University Law, and at Pitt. Specializations are constitutional law, civil rights, international human rights, civil litigation, and he has special expertise in 13th Amendment and racial discrimination. He's also published various pieces of work, and if you'd like to learn more about him, you can read the bio that's in the program. He was gracious enough to share his time and his voice with us this evening, so if you could please help me to welcome Dean Carter.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you. I was just deciding whether I was going to use the microphone, which always makes me feel like Montel Williams, or just talk. I'm not sure if you can all hear me. Maybe I'll just go back and forth when I say something particularly important. I'll leave it to the microphone. It's great to see you all. Thanks so much for having me out here. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. I was asked to keep my remarks brief. It's hot, you've all been standing around, and really the point of the evening here is to celebrate the work of the organizations and the accomplishments of the students who've been selected as MLK interns. So I'm going to try not to talk at my usual law professor length, although if you'd like me to quiz you on Erie Railroad or personal jurisdiction, I'd be happy to do so. I really do want to sincerely both commend and thank the legal aid organizations that are represented here. You know, I've come to learn that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a real leader with regard to legal services, and that's not to suggest that we can't do more, and certainly it's not to suggest that our legal aid organizations don't need better funding, because they do. But we are really held up as a national model for legal services. In fact, at the Legal Services Corporation event last year in Pittsburgh that I saw some of you at, it was really inspiring to hear how much legal aid organizations around the country look up to the work that ours do. So again, I want to thank you all for everything you do. And particularly to congratulate the student interns. You know, the work that you all do, even at this early stage of your careers where you're working and still really learning as you're working, the value that you contribute, I hope you've seen not just from your supervisors at the organizations, but also from the clients who you're representing, how much of a difference you can make even at these very early stages of your careers. You know, when I reflect upon the importance of legal services work, I've seen it both as a practicing attorney through the pro bono work that I've done, but I've also seen it, as I've shared previously, up close with my own family. And as I say quite often, I can't claim that I grew up poor. I know what poor is, but I can't claim that I grew up broke. No resources whatsoever, no lawyers in even the extended family, no ability to really have access to justice, but for the work of legal services organizations and the students who contribute their energy and their time and their intellect to being able to deliver services that really change people's lives in profound and fundamental ways. And I've seen them again in my own family with regard to landlord-tenant issues, with regard to housing issues, with regard to indigent criminal defense issues, with elder care issues, disability issues, medical issues. These things matter so much, and the clients who receive your help are so grateful. And if there's one thing, if you remember nothing else that I say, the students, that is because they don't listen. If the students remember nothing else that I say this evening, I want you to just hold on to that sense that what you do really matters and has a tremendous impact on the lives of the people that you serve. So my congratulations to you for undertaking this important work, and I'd like to encourage you to continue to pursue it. You know, one of the other strengths that I think we have here in Pennsylvania, and I think it's evidenced by the presence of so many senior administrators from the state's law schools, is a real commitment among our law schools to public service and public interest. I can say to a person, knowing every dean at all of the law schools in the Commonwealth, that we are all committed to supporting our students and supporting this work and partnering with the legal aid organizations that deliver such valuable legal services around the state. At Pitt Law, we've been fortunate enough, we received an alumni gift last year where we placed 3 year-long fellows with neighborhood legal services the Community Justice Project and the Southwestern Pennsylvania Legal Services to add to some capacity to the extent that we could of those organizations to continue doing the good work that they do. We've also had the good fortune through another alumnus, John Gismondi, to be able to provide funding for students to work over the summers with legal aid organizations. And one of the challenges that I remember quite acutely as someone who was interested in pursuing this kind of work is simply financial. Even in law school, it is incredibly challenging to make the decision to sacrifice what might be a more lucrative summer internship to do work where your passion, where your heart is. And so I'm very encouraged by these recent gifts from alumni that we then immediately turned to use to support our students doing this work, both after graduation as well as during law school. I think another way in which law schools can be supportive, and an increasing number are being supportive of people who want to provide reasonable or low-cost legal services is through the establishment of what are called legal incubators, one of which we'll be launching at Pitt Law this coming January, where we'll provide space and support and educational programs and alumni networks to recent graduates who want to serve people of modest means and who will build their own practices serving those folks with the support and the help of the school as well as our alumni network. But I think that notwithstanding all of those steps that we and other law schools take, and I haven't even mentioned some of the most important, such as scholarships for students interested in public interest law, which we and others support, loan repayment assistance for students interested in doing this work. We can certainly do a lot more, but I have been encouraged and impressed by the commitment of all of the Pennsylvania law schools to public interest law. I wasn't asked to share substantive remarks, and so I won't do so, but I thought it might be useful, at least for the students in the room, to talk with them a little bit about my career arc and trajectory, because it may not be obvious from where I currently stand that actually my first intention on going to law school was to do the work you're doing. I intended to become either a public service or public interest attorney. And spent my first summer interning with the ACLU of Northern Ohio, my second summer interning with the Department of Justice Asylum and Immigration Division down in DC. And it was incredibly fulfilling and incredibly important work. I ultimately ended up going into private practice for a variety of reasons, but the only reason I wanted to highlight this is to note that even in private practice, and even as an academic, and even now as a dean, I've managed to stay actively involved in legal service and pro bono work in all of those capacities. And I know one of the things that I recall quite acutely myself and some of my colleagues struggling with is if you have a passion for this work, but you ultimately decide that at least your first job will not be in legal services, you wonder if it's possible to stay engaged, and maybe you feel a little guilty, maybe you're worried that you've been diverted from the track that you intended to pursue. And I just wanted to say, while I encourage all of the students to go into public service work if that is what they want to do, even if you don't, you can still remain engaged in these important issues through your pro bono work and otherwise. So don't feel that it's an all or nothing proposition, and don't feel that your first job is your last job either, right? I can guarantee you that your first job for folks your age is not going to be the job you have for the next 40 years. It hasn't even been for me. And so you all will have many opportunities to contribute to this important work and to drive it forward. Even if you don't go into legal services immediately, I want to encourage you to keep in mind all that you can do in whatever role you end up taking. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts in conclusion, notwithstanding my plaudits earlier, which were sincere about the work of our legal services organizations and the work of the law schools. I believe there's much work that remains to be done. It is clear to anyone who has studied issues of access to justice that the justice gap is only growing, and not only among the indigent, but also among the vast middle class and working class, like my family, who I believe, according to the most recent LSAC report, nearly 90% of them cannot afford legal services. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir to some extent, but given that this is being recorded and perhaps some of our legislative officials might stumble across it, I want to emphasize how important it is to put our money where our mouth is and not just mouth the words that providing legal service is important, but to fund it like it is something that is important, something that is crucial to a civilized society grounded in the rule of law. And I think in particular, as you all know, watching many of the issues in the news these days that are of particular interest to me because of my own scholarly work and background with regard to racial justice and discrimination. Notwithstanding it being the 150th anniversary of the enactment of the 13th Amendment, we still, a century and a half later, have a long ways to go with regard to ensuring equal justice under law. And that is an important part of the work that legal services agencies do. And I just want to punctuate one thing, and then I will close and let everyone get on with the fellowship. I always try to encourage students to think about issues of equal justice and access to justice, not only in terms of the big case, right, the class action settlement that leads to shutting down a prison that's abusive, or the desegregation decree. All of those big cases absolutely have an impact. But as the more seasoned legal services attorneys know, the small cases matter. They matter a great deal. You don't have to change the world all at once to change the world. That client whose child has been removed from school and put on the school to prison pipeline because of overzealous disciplinary action that tends to be colored by race and socioeconomic background, you have changed that child's life and that family's life. The family who believes that they're being discriminated against on the basis of a disability and are not able to access the workforce and education and all of the barriers that may stand in their way. Changing their life is part of changing the world. And so I think it's always useful to remind the more junior attorneys among us that it's the small case as well as the big case that can have an impact. So I hope that these brief remarks were at least somewhat helpful and somewhat in line with my charge this evening. But as I said, I really didn't want to take up too much time. I want to let everyone fellowship with one another, but also I want to give the opportunity to turn the focus to the interns whose work and accomplishments we're here celebrating. Thank you for your time.